يا رايحين على مصر مين يبعت سلامي في كلمتين يا أهل الله، مشتاق لناسها الطيبين ودي ياما فيها مخلصين يا ما شاء الله. وفي أزهر العلماء تقدر تقول ما تشاء، ده أنا والله بدعي لهم رب السما وقولوا آمين إن شاء الله إن شاء الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بنور الفهم، وافتح علينا بمعرفة العلم، وحسن أخلاقنا بالحلم، واجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is the fifth lesson in the series of lessons, inshallah, in which we wish to give a guide to a serious student who wishes to pursue studies in the school of Imam Shafii. And just to give you again an overview of what we have been talking about and what we intend to talk about in the remainder of the series. We did give an overview in the first lesson, but since it's been some time, I just wanted to give it again. There are 7 main things that we want to talk about in this series. We've already talked about 2 of these 7. The first thing that we talked about were some of the unique features of the Shafii school. The second thing that we talked about already as well was a brief synopsis of the life of Imam Shafii rahimahullah. The third thing that we started talking about last time and want to continue talking about in this lesson and perhaps the following lesson as well is the development of the school after Imam Shafii all the way until the 14th century Hijrah. We want to mention some of the main scholars that have come during this period of time and see how the madhab, how the school developed. After that, the fourth thing that we're going to talk about, inshallah, is the golden chain, what's called the golden chain of scholars in the Shafii school. Then the fifth thing that we are going to talk about, inshallah, is Imam al-Nawawi's book called Minhaj al-Talibin. After which we are going to read from the introduction of that book, Minhaj al-Talibin. And finally, the last thing that we will talk about, inshallah, is the traditional curriculum of a Shafii student, the books that a Shafii student normally studies, starting from a basic book all the way until the most advanced. So we are talking about the development of the school after Imam Shafii until the 14th century. And last time we started talking about that, and we talked about the 3 main students of Imam Shafii in his new school in Egypt: Imam al-Muzani, Imam al-Buwaiti, and Imam al-Rabi' al-Muradi, rahimahumullahu ta'ala jami'an. So they represented the Shafii school in the 3rd century Hijri. We're going to move now to the 4th century. 4th century. In this century, the scholars who came in this century worked to expand and record the Shafi'i madhab as they learned from the direct students of Imam Shafi'i, Muzani, Rabi', Buwaiti, and others. By the way, those were not the only students of Imam Shafi'i, Buwaiti, Muzani, and Rabi', they were just the major students. We cannot mention all of them. There's a lot of them, but those were the major students. So the 4th century now, we'll see scholars that learned from the direct students of Imam Shafii and then expanded on the legal corpus that was left behind by them, expanded on that, and also continued to record the new issues that were coming up at their time and the opinions that they were formulating about those issues. So some of the scholars of this time are Ahmad ibn Umar ibn Surayj. Ahmad ibn Umar ibn Surayj, rahimahullah ta'ala, who passed away in 306. Another major scholar from this time is Al-Qaffal Al-Shashi, also referred to as Al-Qaffal Al-Kabir. Okay, and he died in 365 Hijri. One of the main things that he's known for is his commentary on the Risala of Imam Shafii rahimahullah ta'ala. He's one of the people who wrote a commentary on it. There were a number of scholars who wrote commentaries on it. He's one of the earliest ones who wrote a commentary on Imam Shafii's Risala. Another scholar of this time that's very well known is Abu Sa'id al-Istakhri. Al-Istakhri. Abu Sa'id al-Istakhri, who died in 328. Another important name from this time is Abu Bakr al-Sayrafi. Al-Sayrafi, who died in 330 Hijri, and he also authored a commentary on the Risala of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah. And the last one that I want to share with you from this time period is this is Abu Ali al-Tabari. This is Abu Ali al-Tabari, who died in 350. This is not the Mufassir Ibn Jarir al-Tabari or Abu Ja'far al-Tabari. This is Abu Ali al-Tabari. He is from the 4th century, and he is one of the major Shafi'i scholars from that time. These scholars, and also the ones before them from the 3rd century, like Muzani and Buwaitli and Rabi' and others, all the way until the end of the 4th century, these are called Ashabul Wujuh. Ashabul Wujuh. And Ashabul Wujuh is a term that appears quite frequently, especially in the larger works of the Shafi'i school, and they are held in very high esteem. Ashabul Wujuh are scholars of the highest caliber within the Shafi'i school after Imam Shafi'i and his direct students. Ashabul Wujuh are people whose opinions are regarded highly in the Shafi'i school, especially if those opinions have to do with issues on which Imam Shafi'i himself didn't have an opinion. So if there are issues on which Imam Shafi'i didn't have an opinion, and the Ashabul Wujuh had opinions about them, then they are given a lot of regard in the school, and oftentimes they do become the madhab, the official position of the school, as long as they follow the qawa'id. They generally do. They do follow the principles that were laid out by Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. So these are called the Ashabul Wujuh. There is differences in opinion about who is Ashabul Wujuh and who is not Ashabul Wujuh. In other words, who belongs in this category and who does not. What is the definition, if you will, the exact definition of Ashab al-Wujuh. There is debate about that, but the most popular opinion seems to be that they end at the end of the 4th century. So anybody before 400 Hijri is considered to be Ashab al-Wujuh, according to the most popular opinion, although, as I said, there is disagreement about this issue. Then, after this, let's go on to the 5th century. So now this is the period after Ashab al-Wujuh, the 5th century. Who are some of the major scholars, major Shafi'i scholars of the 5th century? The 5th century saw the rise of 2 diverging tracks in the Shafi'i school. The 2 diverging tracks, or tariq. Tariqatul Iraqiyin and Tariqatul Khurasaniyin. The Iraqi track, if you will, or the Iraqi methodology, and the Khurasani track or methodology. And what this represents basically is, after Imam Shafi'i passed away, remember, in Egypt. He passed away in Egypt. Egypt was a center of the Islamic world, and scholars would come from all over the world to Egypt to study with the students of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. And then they would go back to their lands and teach. So after they would go back to their lands and teach, there started to develop two main schools, if you will, two separate tracks or methodologies, where when the scholars would go back after learning from the students of Imam al-Shafi'i, they would then begin to expand on what they had learned. They would begin to expand on what they had learned by dealing with new issues that would come up in their localities about which they didn't learn a direct ruling from the students of Imam al-Shafi'i. So they would exercise their own ijtihad to find analogies for these new issues based on what they had learned about other issues from the students of Imam al-Shafi'i. And sometimes the conclusions at which they would arrive would be different here and different here, because different minds are working in different places. So it's natural, and this is something on which there is no explicit text from Imam al-Shafi'i. So they would arrive sometimes at different conclusions. And then those rulings would then be used for future issues. And the differences would, grow. The differences would grow. So there appear to be this clearly divergent methodologies between the two lands, the Iraqi lands, Iraq, and Khurasan. Okay, the eastern part of the Islamic Empire. And this extends all the way to India and China and all of that, and west, anything east of Iraq pretty much. Ma wara'un nahr, as it's also referred to in the Arabic language, beyond the river. So these divergent tracks had begun to appear, the Khurasani track and the Iraqi track. And so we have to talk about who are some of the major scholars that represent the Iraqi track, and who are some of the major scholars that represent the Khurasani track. Okay, so under the Iraqi track, First of all, we have Abu Hamid al-Isfarayini. Abu Hamid al-Isfarayini, who died in 406 Hijri. He's considered to be the head of the Iraqi track. The head of the Iraqi track. The head of the Khurasani track is considered to be Abu Bakr al-Qaffal al-Saghir al-Marwazi. Abu Bakr al-Qaffal al-Saghir. And now remember, when we were talking about the scholars of the 4th century, we mentioned another Qaffal. That was al-Qaffal al-Kabir al-Shashi. Al-Qaffal al-Shashi al-Kabir. That's one of the reasons why I pointed out his name, to distinguish him from him. This is al-Qaffal al-Saghir al-Marwazi, who is considered to be the head of the Khurasani track, and he died in 417, whereas al-Qaffal al-Kabir al-Shashi died in 365. This is 417. This is a separate scholar. It's a different scholar with the same name, al-Qaffal. Khurasanis are sometimes also referred to as al-Marawiza. Al-Marawiza. Tariqatul Khurasaniyin or Tariqatul Marawiza. It's the same thing. And one of the reasons is because they had so many scholars from Al-Maru, or from that general area, such as Al-Qaffal al-Saghir, Al-Marwazi from Al-Maru. So that's why they're called Al-Marawiza. So these were the two primary heads, if you will, of the Iraqi track and the Khurasani track. And then we had later scholars also then who represented each of these two tracks. So for example, one of the most famous scholars that represented the Iraqi track is Abu al-Hasan al-Mawardi. Abu al-Hasan al-Mawardi, who died in 450 after Hijrah. And he has authored one of the most famous books in the Shafii school, which is called Al-Hawi Al-Kabir. Al-Hawi Al-Kabir. He is a representative of the Iraqi track, Tariqatul Iraqiyin, if you will. On the other hand, a famous scholar from a similar time period that represents the Khurasani track or the Khurasani methodology is Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni. Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni, who died in 438 Hijri. Okay, he is the father of Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Juwayni, who we're going to talk about a few minutes from now. But this is Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni, the father, and he represents the Khurasani track as well. Okay. Then after this, we had scholars who came from one of these two tracks, but in their works, they tried to merge the two tracks. They tried to reconcile the two tracks. So they are primarily Iraqiyin or primarily Khurasaniyin, but they have also studied with the scholars of the other camp, and then when they write their works in fiqh, they try to mention both schools of thought or both methodologies or both tracks, and then try to reconcile between the differences. So this is now called Tariqatul Jam' or Al-Jam'u Bayna Al-Tariqatayn. Al-Jam'u Bayna Al-Tariqatayn. combining between the two tracks or reconciling between the two tracks. And one of the most famous examples of this is Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi. Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, who died in 476 Hijri and is the author of the famous book called Al-Muhadhab. Al-Muhadhab. He is essentially Iraqi in his upbringing and in his learning. He learned primarily from the Iraqi scholars, from the Iraqi. By Iraqi, I don't mean scholars from Iraq, but I mean scholars who belonged to the Iraqi track, the Iraqi methodology. Okay, so Shirazi is essentially Iraqi in his methodology, but he also benefited from the Khurasani track scholars, and therefore when he wrote his book Al-Muhadhab, Al-Muhadhab is supposed to be a book that represents Al-Jam'u Bayna al-Tariqatayn. It is supposed to be a work that represents a reconciliation, a bringing together of the two tracks or the two methodologies. And similarly, we have a scholar like that from the Khurasani camp, which is Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni, the son of Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni, who passed away in 478, also called Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Haramain, or simply referred to as Al-Imam, Al-Imam in our books. He's given the title Al-Imam, and we'll talk about him more a little bit later, but his famous book is called Nihayatul Matlab. Nihayatul Matlab. Nihayatul Matlab. Nihayatul Matlab fi Dirayatil Madhab. He was essentially Khurasani in his learning, but he had also benefited from the Iraqi scholars, and in his book Nihayatul Matlab, he brought together the opinions of the two tracks. Okay, so this is how the two tracks culminated into coming together by scholars such as Shirazi, Al-Juwayni, and others, and the differences therefore were removed with time. Okay, now there's a couple of other scholars also from the 5th century that are worthy of mention here. I would like to mention two of them in particular. One is Al-Bayhaqi. Al-Bayhaqi, who died in 458. And Al-Bayhaqi is the author of many different books, including a book called Ma'rifatul Athari wa Ma'rifatul Sunani wal Athar, Ma'rifa As-Sunan wal Athar. And he wrote a lot of different works recording the teachings of Imam Shafii, and also providing support, if you will, providing support to the opinions of Imam Shafii. To the extent that Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni said about Al-Bayhaqi that every follower of Shafi'i is indebted to him, meaning a Shafi'i. Every follower of Shafi'i is indebted to Shafi'i except Al-Bayhaqi. Except Al-Bayhaqi, who Shafi'i is indebted to because of the prolific amount of works that he compiled to advocate for the school of Imam al-Shafi'i. All right, so Al-Bayhaqi's books are a primary reference, if you will. His works represent a primary reference for people who want to look into the reasoning and evidences behind the opinions of Imam Shafii, as well as the opinions of Imam Shafii themselves. He primarily deals with textual bases for the opinions of Imam Shafii. And the other person, the last scholar that I want to mention, who belongs to this era, the 5th century, is Qadi Abu Shuja'. Qadi Abu Shuja', who died in 488 Hijri. And he's the author of the famous matan called Ghayatul Ikhtisar. Ghayatul Ikhtisar. Ghayatul Ikhtisar. Also referred to as Matan Abi Shuja'. Matan Abi Shuja'. He died in 488. He is also from the 5th century. Ghayatul Ikhtisar is his book. Then we go to the 6th century, inshallah. And 6th century was the time where the madhab was edited, where the school was edited, and the major scholars that were responsible for that were people like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who died in 505 Hijri, and he wrote a number of books in the Shafi'i school in fiqh, such as Al-Wajiz and Al-Wasit and other books as well. So Imam al-Ghazali is one of the most important Shafi'i scholars from the 6th century, early 6th century, and he wrote a number of books in Shafi'i fiqh. And we'll talk more about Imam al-Ghazali when we talk about the golden chain, inshaAllah ta'ala. Another scholar from this time who is important is Abu al-Husayn al-Imrani, who died in 558 Hijrah. And one of his most important works is Al-Bayan fi Madhhab al-Imam al-Shafi'i, which is a commentary of Al-Muhadhab. This is a commentary of Al-Muhadhab, which we talked about earlier, which was authored by Al-Shirazi. Al-Shirazi's Muhadhab was explained by Al-Imrani in Al-Bayan, and this is in print today, published by Darul Minhaj. Then we go to the 7th century. And the 7th century was the century when the madhab was edited with the final editing, if you will. The school went through a final editing in the 7th century at the hands of two major scholars. The first of them is Abdul Karim al-Rafi'i. Abdul Karim al-Rafi'i, who died in 623 Hijrah. And he wrote a number of important works in the Shafi'i school, the most important of which are Al-Aziz and Al-Muharrar. Al-Wajiz and Al-Aziz and Al-Muharrar. Al-Aziz is a commentary on Al-Wajiz of Imam Al-Ghazali. It's a commentary on Al-Wajiz of Imam Al-Ghazali. And the second scholar, who is the most important scholar of this century, and perhaps one of the most important scholars of the Shafi'i school after Imam Shafii himself, is Imam Sharafuddin Abu Zakaria Yahya An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. Sharafuddin Abu Zakaria Yahya ibn Sharaf An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in 676 Hijrah, and some of his most important books include Rawdatul Talibin, Rawdat al-Talibin, which is a summary of this book, which is a summary of Al-Aziz, and the other book is Minhaj al-Talibin, Minhaj al-Talibin, which is a summary of this book. Okay, so Imam al-Rafi'i and Imam al-Nawawi were the two main scholars of the 7th century, and these are the books of al-Rafi'i, and these are some of the most important books of Imam al-Nawawi. And we will talk more about both of them when we talk about the golden chain. We'll stop at the 7th century, inshallah. We'll pick up with the 8th century next time. Wa sallallahu wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
ووجههم عند مولى الفضل مقبول قوم إلى الله قد شدت عزائمهم وحبلهم بحبال الله موصول قوم على الملة السمحاء قد فطروا وشأنهم مع كتاب الله من قولوا أعطاهم الله ما شاءوا وأكرمهم كذاك قال الذي وفاه جبريل يا ربنا خذ بنا قلبا لساحتهم لنستريح ويحمى القال والقيل العلماء لهم جاه ومنزلة ووجههم عند مولى الفضل مقبول